Hello and welcome to the video for our Python project on a thing called Maths Practice. This is going to ask the user a series of questions and they're going to be able to set how many questions they want to answer and what they want the biggest number to be in that. So let's have a look at it in action to start with. How many questions do I want to answer? 5. I'll go all the way up to 12. So 2 times 8 is 16. Yes. 3 times 2 is 5. Incorrect. 3 times 2 equals 6. 3 times 12 is 36, 2 times that is 24, that is 42, and it tells me that I scored 4 out of 5. Now, let's run this and let's see some of the validation. So, if I put nothing in there, it's going to say, please enter a whole number greater than 0. So it's validating against me putting nothing in. If I put in a word, it tells me again to enter a whole number. So it forces me into putting in an integer that is greater than 0. Let's try putting in -5. Yep, still won't accept that. So let's do 10 questions. And the same validation will apply both here when we're asking for the largest number and when we're answering a question. So if we answer a question, it actually won't even look at the answer until we put it in a valid form. So you notice that it's asking me the same question. So that is how this project works on the ground. In terms of supporting documentation, I've got the steps here that I'm going to be going through in this video. Some of you will want to code along with me throughout the entire video. I would strongly encourage you, where you can, look at the step and think, can I code this on my own? And if you can't, come back and check the time code, and they're not in the video yet, but they will be by the time I've finished this. And just jump to that section where you need the help. Now, I've also given you your data dictionary so you know what the variables are. Now, there's quite a lot in this project, and I would like you to use the same variables that I'm using, and I explain to you what they're for and sometimes how you use them. So this is really something that you should be using to guide you as you code, and the testing table. Now, if you're feeling really confident in your Python coding, you might actually just want to go ahead and make it so that it's just like mine. You will need to check that you've got the data dictionary and you're using the same variable names that I am, but you might just build it off the top of your head and you'll know if it's satisfactory because it will pass all 10 of these tests, actually all 12 of these tests. But if you're doing it entirely with me, you still need to go through and test your software and make sure that it actually passes all the tests. Do not just do this when your program check is finished and say, oh, well, it's not quite right. Do it as you're going and try and pass each test as you go. Make sure that what actually happened is what we're expecting to happen, and then move forward with the next bit. This is not a long project. Mine's only about, I think, 40 lines of code. Let's have a quick look. Yeah, about 40 lines of code. But it does take, there are things that have to be done just so. Okay, so let's pause now and I'll come back in a tick and we'll do step 1. Alright, let's get into step 1. Set up the random library import and set the value of the variable score to 0. Well, that's pretty easy. Let's jump over here. I'm going to put that in as a comment. So it says we're going to import random. There we go. And we are going to say that score equals 0. Well, that's step 1, and that was really easily done. Now, let's do step 2. Okay, now step 2 is an absolute beast. There's quite a lot that's going on in step 2. So, what we're doing here, and I'll just pop it in here as a comment, is we're building a function. And this function is going to be called input positive int, and it's only going to return a positive integer. Now, if you haven't encountered functions before, a function is like a mini program that you can call when you want it to do something specific. They're very, very useful in programming because it means that we can redo a task over and over again without having to write that code out again. It means that our program is simpler because we've only got that functionality in one place. I like to think of it like having a little helper that you can give information to. It will work with that information and it will give you something back. Okay, let's start building this function. In Python, you actually use the word def for defining a function. In other languages, you actually write the word function. But it's worth remembering in Python, that's def. So the name of the function, and I can call it anything that I want, but I think it's good to call it something meaningful. And in this case, I've defined it in the data dictionary. That is the function there. Now, that could be the definition of our function, but we're actually going to pass in a variable to it called question. So everything, you'll see that we're indented here, everything from here on in is part of this function. Well, the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to set this boolean, and I'm going to say that isValid equals false. So we're starting out by assuming that what we've got is not good enough. It doesn't meet the requirements. And then we're going to set a loop and say while isValid, there you go, while isValid is false, and you'll notice that I'm using double equals there because I'm asking a question. So as long as isValid is false, we are going to do the following things. And again, you'll see that we're indented again because we are now kind of controlled by that statement up on line 8. Well, this is something you'll remember from the last project. We are going to try. So we are going to try and get an integer from them. So we're going to try. Well, what are we going to try? We are going to try and get this thing called, now this is where I'm going to go back and have a look at my data dictionary. We are going to get isValid new int is what we're trying to collect. So we're going to say that new int equals an integer. Where are we getting it? Well, we're getting it from an input. And what are we saying to the user? Well, we're saying the value of question. So we're actually going to pass the question into the function. So new int equals int input question. Close that off. Now, if that doesn't work, that means they haven't put in an integer. So we're going to print an error message. And I'm actually going to go and get that error message from my testing table to make sure that I've got the text correct. So there we go. There is my testing table. And it says, please enter a whole number greater than 1. Okay? So now, I actually can't test this at the moment because nothing's calling the function, but I can run the program and it will just make sure that there's no errors in there. So you'll notice that I pressed F5, but it hasn't caused any errors. Okay, so now we have our third condition, which is else. And as you might remember from the other video, somewhat confusingly, else actually means that the try was successful. So if the try is successful, we're actually going to say that isValid equals true. Actually, you know what? We're not, because we've got one more question to ask it. We want to know if it's greater than 0. So we're going to ask another question. So if, what's it called? New int. If new int is greater than 0, then we're going to say that isValid equals true. IsValid equals true, and we need to hand information back to the main program, which is called a return, and we're handing back new int. Now, that is my complete function. Let's go back to the edge because I don't want to be in that function anymore, and I'm just going to run it to make sure there's no errors. Good, it didn't produce any errors. So let's have a look at what I was doing. I was making a function that can only return a positive integer. I don't know for sure that that works, but I know that it hasn't got any errors. Actually, before I move on, I'm going to use this function. So I'm going to put in something which is not going to be part of the final product. So penguins is going to equal input positive int, and I'm going to pass it a question. How many penguins do you have? Okay. So what this should do is it should ask a question of how many penguins do you have, and it should only accept an integer greater than 1. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to print the type of penguins when it comes back. So I'm going to put type penguins just to see what type of variable I get back, and then I'm actually just going to print the value of it. There we go. So again, this isn't going to be in the long-term program. This is just to make sure that my function works. How many penguins do I have? Let's put in nothing. Good. So it rejected me if I put in nothing. 0. So it didn't reject me. Yes, it did, because it's still asking me. So what I in fact think I'll do is I'll put in an else statement here. And so if they put in nothing, then I'll give them this message again. So I'm glad I did the testing. I found something useful. There we go. All right, let's run this again. So how many penguins do I have? 0. There you go. nothing at all. Let's say I have 2. Good. And let's put in an integer, 10. There you go. It says 10 and 10. So I now know that that works, and I'm going to throw out this bit of code here because I've now been able to successfully test that. All right, let's get on with part 3 of the project. All right, let's have a look at part 3 of the project. I'm just going to start off by looking at my data dictionary here. I've set up score at the start of my program. I've set up this function called input positive integer. I've passed in the string of question. I've used isValid to test whether what they've given me is valid or not. That's a boolean. And I have used that variable called newInt, which is what I collected from the user and then I tested within the functions. In this next bit, I'm going to, and let's just have a look at my steps, I'm going to use the function to get the values for number of questions and max num from the user. All right, well then let's do this. This is very much what I did in the last one. So, number of questions, whoops, let's spell that correctly. Number of questions, you'll notice that I'm using camel case there. Number of questions equals, and I'm going to call that by saying its name, input. I'm going to ask it a question, and the question I'm going to ask it is, how many questions would you like to answer? There we go. And let's test that. And again, I just noticed that I still had a spelling mistake in there. So I run it. How many questions would you like to answer? 2, nope. 0, nope. 10, yes. Okay, terrific. All right, so, and I also want to know what the max number to use is. So max num equals, and again, I just say the name of the function, and I put in the question. What is the largest number you want in the questions? And we close that, and now we run them both. Just see that they both work. So how many questions? 10. Largest number? 0. Yep, it's not accepting that. -3. Not accepting that. 5 accepts that. Okay, fantastic. So we have successfully done part 3. All right, let's get on with part 4. So part 4, if I just jump over here, tells me that I am going to create a loop so the program asks a specified number of questions. All right, so a loop, so for I in range. Now I'm using I just because it's convention, but also that's because of what I listed in the data dictionary. And in range is where I'll put the largest number that it could be. But that's actually something that the user is setting, and they're setting that with number of questions. I put a semicolon on the end, and you'll see that I'm indented. So for now, I'm actually just going to print I. And now when I run it, how many questions? I'd like to answer 10. And it counted. It looks like it only counted to 9, but because it started with a 0, that actually ran 10 times. So I now have completed part 4, and that I've got that loop going, and that once we fill it in, will ask us the 10 questions. All right, now we're up to step 5. The program is going to generate the 2 numbers used in the questions, and it's going to put the question in a variable. Now I actually probably should say question, because we're doing this one at a time within the loop. So I've already got this here in my comment. Now I'm also going to comment out, in fact I'm just going to remove it where I was printing I. I don't need that long term. Okay, so it generates the 2 numbers used. 2 number used. No, it is numbers because they're 2 numbers. Okay, the first one is called first num. Now I know this because it's in the data dictionary and it's nice and descriptive. I'm using the random library. I'm using randint. And the largest it can be is max num. That's what the user entered to say that's the largest number that we want to use. Then second num is actually not even basically identical. It is identical. Randint, and again it is max num. So that should be generating those 2 numbers. I won't be able to see them, but I should be able to run the program without error. 10, 10. There we go. So what's missing is that the random int wants to know what the smallest number it can be is. I'm actually going to set it as 2 because I don't really want to be asking questions like what is 1 times 5. I want it to be asking slightly more intelligent questions such as what is 2 times 5. But I'm glad that I found that error. There we go, and it ran. So it generated those numbers, I just couldn't see it. Now the next thing it says is that I put the question in a variable. Well, this is called this question, and again, this is what I detailed in the data dictionary. This question, now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stitch together a string using literal text in talking marks and variables, but I'm going to have to cast those variables as strings so that I can get away with doing this. So, what is plus? Now that's the stitching. That's what connects it to the next thing. Now, I want to know first number, but if I put it in like that, it actually won't work because the data type of that is an integer. So I need to cast it as a string. I'm basically saying, hey, I want you to behave as if you're a string. What is, and then the word times, you'll notice that I'm leaving spaces around that, plus second number, plus question mark. There we go. Now, just for the sake of seeing my work, I'm going to print this question. This won't be in my long-term program. I just want to test this to make sure that step 5 is working properly. How many questions? 10, 10. There we go. So it in fact is not working properly. So there's something wrong with my concatenation. It's because it actually tells me you can only concatenate string, not integer, and that's because I forgot to cast that as a string. Okay, let's give it another go. 10, 10, fantastic. So as you can see, it's now coming up with the questions. All right, so now I have completed section 5. Okay, section 6. Use the input positive int function to get the user's answer. Okay, so I'm actually going to take away that thing there. So I want to know what the user answer is. Now let me just check my data dictionary and see what variable I said I would use for that. So max number, first number, this question, this answer. Okay, so this answer is going to, and this is where we go and we get the function to do our work for us. And so we input positive int, and the question we're asking it is that question that we actually constructed on line 28, which is this question. There we go. Now let's see if that works. 4 times 8, doesn't matter. Yep, so it's accepting my input. And I've got all of that stuff happening in the validation, so it's actually not letting me get away with putting in stuff that's not useful to the program, and you'll see it's repeating the same question there. So you're locked in that function until you give it an integer which is a positive value. So, although you can't say 0, and you can't say that either. So, there we go, that works. So now I can tick off step 6 on my list. Okay, we're on the home straight now. Step 7, compare the value collected from the user with the calculated answer. If the answer is correct, show correct and increase their score by 1. Okay, well, there's a few bits in this, but let's start easy. So we're saying if this answer equals. Now we actually don't have a variable that equals the answer, but we can compare it with a calculation. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to say if it equals first number times second number, then. So we actually don't need to have a variable for that. You could have one if you wanted. It certainly wouldn't be wrong. So if they do get it right, well, then I want to increase their score. So score equals score plus 1. Whoops, score equals score equals score. That would not have worked. Plus 1, and I'm going to print the word correct. Now, let me just read what it says I'm meant to do. I'm comparing it. If the answer is correct, show correct and increase their score by 1. Well, that should work. Let's give it a quick test. Here we go. If it equals equals. So it's not correct. Okay, let's just go for 5 and 5. 2 times 5 is 10. Correct. 5 times 5 is 20. Now it says nothing, and that's fine because it's got no reason to, but it's not saying correct because it didn't equal first number times second number. Okay, so let's just finish off the program. And in fact, we can now say part 7 is done. All right, let's have a look at part 8. Part 8 says if their answer is not correct, show incorrect and show them the correct equation. Use else for this. So you could have a second question that says if this answer does not equal that. But what we can do is a catch-all called else. Now you'll notice that it's back on the same line as if. So basically if you fail this first test, then you do this second thing. So if you pass, you do that. If you fail, you do that. Well, your score doesn't go up, but we do print. And now we're going to do some on-the-fly concatenation here. Incorrect. Now, what are we doing here? We've got the first number. So what I'm actually going to do is going to use the comma way of concatenating here because I can do that in a print statement. So, first number, first num, times. Now, I'm actually going to, no, I'll use the word times. Now, you'll notice here that I actually don't need to have a space in there because when you use the comma, it assumes a space. So, first times, comma, second. In here, I'm just going to put the equal sign. And again, I don't need those extra spaces. Equals. And here, I'm going to put first num times second num. Now, that should work. Should being the operative phrase. All right, let's run it and see if that happens. Okay, 5, 5, 2 times 2 is 5. Incorrect, 2 times 2 equals 4. Okay, so that is working. So I'm just going to fail my way out of that. Okay, so question 8 is done. All right, let's finish this off with part 9. Now, part 9 is to show the user their score out of the total questions. So I'm going to grab that and put it in. Now, this is all going to happen after the loop is over because the loop was asking them their individual questions. So we go in and show the user their score. Well, I need to go to the edge there, print, you scored. So I'm using the same method of concatenation I was up on line 36. Now they scored, they scored, and then the comma, score, out of, now, how many questions did we ask them? Well, that was still in the variable number of questions. Okay, so let's see if this works. I'll answer 5, largest number I want, 10, 20, 30, 9, 80, and 8 times 6, let's see, 60 minus 12 is 48. There you go, and I scored 5 out of 5. Let's just run that again and check that it's not just giving me a perfect score. 5 times 2 is 10, so I'm going to get 2 right and 3 wrong. 4 times 5 is 20, and then I'm just going to get a bunch of them wrong. There we go, and I've got 2 out of 5. So there you go. Now I just need to go through and make sure that I've done my testing table and that it does all the things that it's meant to. It should at this point, but I might have a little bit of work done, but that is the end of the tutorial video, and good luck with the rest of your project.